Hey everyone, in today's video we are going to be going over Materialize button component with React. I'm going to go over their documentation, show you a couple of use cases, and sort of give you an overall idea. The button component is probably one of the simplest components you can use, but even the simpler components have some intricacies that are good to know when you're developing. As a reminder, if you like this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or hitting the thumbs up button. It really means a lot. It helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps get this channel out there to a lot more people. So as we can see here on the documentation, we have a couple of different examples. The first examples are showing things like, for example, differences in colors by using the color prop. And all of these examples, by the way, are using the variant prop, and the actual value for that variant is contained. And you'll see the differences in just a second. We can see here we have a button that is disabled and a link button that will actually has an href attribute that will go somewhere after you click it. We can see here as we scroll down, we have a couple of different variations, one that has the disable elevation prop, and over here you can see that these text buttons aren't being passed in any variant. So if you were to try and just import a Material UI button into your project and not pass in any props, it's pretty much going to look like one of these buttons here. When you click on it, it's not going to have any outline or anything. It's just going to be text, and when you hover it, it will show all the stylings that a button would show. We can see here another variant is outline, which makes it sort of look like this cool neon sign. This is personally my favorite. You can actually put your button in a input, and you can make it do things like, for example, when you click it, you can upload a file. By the way, these code examples are all over here on Material UI's documentation. We can see here they have a couple of preset sizes, and these sizes are actually somewhat based on your theme file. So for example, if you wanted to give it a size of small, it would be this size, and so forth. We have buttons where you can add icons. It's important to note for this icon button that the icon that you pass in is actually the element itself. It takes in the actual icon node itself. It does not take in something like, for example, just the name of an icon. So if you wanted an icon at the start, you would pass in start icon with the name, with the actual icon element. And you can add a lot of customizations to this icon, anything you would normally be able to do with the icon component. Then we have icon buttons, which aren't quite the same as actual buttons. So you'll see here, if we try and click one of these icons over here, or even if we hover over close to the icon, this sort of button forms around it, and when we click it, it shows the click effect. Let's go ahead, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy all of this code into here, just so we can look at this a bit closer. Let's go ahead and save that and refresh. So we can see here, right now, it's just like it is in the demo. When I click around this icon, we get the sort of button stylings. If I were to delete this icon button, however, what we're actually left with is just the icon, and when we click around it, nothing happens. So the whole point of icon button is to turn a regular icon into something that resembles a button. It will center the icon in this sort of button wrapper, and when you click on it, it'll have the ripple effect, and it'll take the same color as the actual icon itself. So it's actually, the icon will take the color of the icon button that you pass in. So it's actually pretty cool and pretty useful if you have icons in your application that you want to have handle on clicks and stuff like that as well. So then obviously you can have customized buttons, which we won't go into just yet, where you can overwrite any CSS or any other stylings that the default buttons have. So we have more complex buttons. We're not going to get into that. And then some limitations. So the biggest limitation that Material UI has when it comes to buttons is that for disabled buttons, if you wanted to make the cursor on a disabled button show that it's not allowed, so show the little circle with the cross through it, you would have to actually add custom CSS to the disabled properly of that button saying that the cursor is not allowed. So let's take a look at their API and look at the type of props you can pass in. So obviously we have classes for any CSS overwrites. We have children, whereas you can which pretty much is where you can pass things like what you want to go inside of it. You have the color. These colors are decided in the Material UI themes. So if you are using themes, you can actually overwrite primary and secondary. Component is very useful if you are trying to do things like, for example, prop forwarding. So if you wanted your button to have a router link, so when you click it, it actually actually does something related to router. If you're using, for example, React Router in your application, you can set the component to your router link or anything like that. I've never personally had to do this myself, and I think it's a bit of an edge case, but just so you have an idea that it exists, there you go. We have disable elevation, so if this is true, it'll pretty much get rid of any box shadow around the button component. We can see here, if we go to a regular button and we were to inspect element, you would see here that it has a box shadow. Now, if we go down and inspect this one, we can see here that it adds, sorry, where is it? Bam. We can see here that it gets passed in the disable elevation class, which actually makes the box shadow to none. So that's the difference with disable elevation, disable focus ripple, and disable focus. So they pretty much accomplish the same thing. You need disable ripple enabled in order to use disable focus ripple, and this just makes it so that the keyboard focus ripple will be disabled. Let's try using both of these. So we're going to pass in disable ripple and disable focus ripple. Let's go ahead and save that. We'll even rename it to without ripple. And we can see here when we click, it doesn't show that same ripple effect that it used to. So I'm going to go ahead and revert it, and you'll see when I click now, it shows that whole animation when you click it. We have end icon and start icon. So these both take in React nodes, and you pretty much can pass, like we saw in the example, any icon you want into there. End icon, obviously, when you pass in it, it'll go to the end of the button. Start icon will go to the start of the button. Full width, so by giving your button the full width attribute, it will make sure that it spans the entire div. So we can see here that the whole container div that the button is in is being expanded to with the full width icon. Href, if you want your button to go somewhere. Size, medium, small, large. So we can, let's go ahead and just let's get rid of the full width, and let's just make buttons with size equal to small, large, and medium. So you can see we have a small button, medium button, and large button. Not only do the padding around the text change, but the text itself actually gets bigger. And something cool to note about Material UI buttons is through Material Design, button text should actually always be capitalized and have certain letter spacing. So the button automatically applies that to whatever text you choose to pass in. And then the last thing we have is variant, which we've sort of examined. So I'll make this small button outline. We can make this one contained, and then we can make this one just text by removing it, since text is default. And here you can see the actual different variants. Now let's move on and look at how to overwrite some of the button styles. So as you can see here, I have a small button, and I've applied some styles in the classic React Material UI way. I have a make styles hook that I'm using. I'm getting the classes from that make styles hook, and I'm pretty much just applying those styles from that classes as a class name, which will work on pretty much any React element. As you can see here, I've made a style called root. I have made it so that the color is red and the border is none when you're not hovering over it. As you can see, when I hover over it, this color is still blue because we haven't overwritten that. And I passed it in as a simple class name. Now, you might be saying, well, okay, I know how to do that, but in Material UI, there's also another classes prop that you can actually use as well. So while we might not see any differences when we're doing it like this, for example, the button still looks the exact same, you'll see here, when you are actually overriding elements, you can actually target them, target the deeper inner elements using Material UI's classes. The difference between classes and class names is that class name will pretty much just apply styling over on top of the actual element. Well, when you use classes and you target any of these elements over here, it will apply those styles inside of the actual button component. So if you imagine Material UI as a library, whenever, for example, the root of the button gets rendered, it will apply those styles straight to the root and not just on top of whatever classes you have. And another big use case for using classes for certain elements of your component instead of class name is that you can target extremely specific stuff. For example, this outline secondary rule. We can apply a style to a button only if the variant is equal to outlined and the color is secondary. So by using this class's prop, we can actually target a lot of things that we wouldn't normally be able to overwrite the styles for specifically. Now the last thing you should know about the button component is that there's actually a button group component, and while I almost never see this being used, it's pretty much just a cool way to have a lot of buttons sort of aligned in any different way. So for example, you can see here we have a button group, and then we nest a bunch of buttons within that group, and we can specify what we want the color for all those buttons to be. We can specify a label for it, and there are a lot of different variants as well. So for example, the default variant is just one that sort of looks like this. Then we can have one that is contained, which means all of them will be contained, and then we have text, which will pretty much show the same way normal text buttons show, but a little divider in the middle just to separate the different buttons. You can add stylings, you can such as size, you can add orientation, so you can make them stack on top of each other. It should be noted though that this is different than Material UI's tabs, which might be what most people are looking for when they see something like that. Tabs are actually a component where when you click it, it renders something different below it. So this is really good for if you have a website and you sort of want to switch the view every time the user clicks a different tab. I haven't seen a lot of use cases for button group, but it's still something good to know that it exists. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found value in it. If you did, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment about what you want to learn next, what from Material UI you want to know, or anything about React, and it really helps the channel a lot, so I really appreciate it. Hope you all have a good day and stay safe.